ATV World. Crown Prince Hotel Dongguan Special 2003, the year that was at home, is sponsored by Crown Prince Hotel Dongguan.
Hello and thanks for staying with ATV. I'm Yondan Latu. For those of you who've just joined us, the previous half hour of a look back at the past year showed just how much George Bush's war on terror continued to dominate world affairs. But while Saddam Hussein's capture helped Bush end 2003 on a triumphant note, here in Hong Kong it's been a difficult year for Tung Chee-hwa. The credibility of his administration sunk to its lowest level since he became chief executive in 1997. Public dissatisfaction with his policies and his top officials plagued him throughout the year. But his biggest crisis was the SARS epidemic.
No one imagined it would be like this, living under the shadow of a killer disease that claimed people's lives just as ruthlessly as it ruined their fortunes. This is where Hong Kong's worst medical disaster began, the Metropole Hotel. It all started on February 21st when Liu Jianlun, a mainland physician, checked into the hotel. Liu was already ill when he came here to attend his nephew's wedding. Because he was so sick, Liu had to skip the wedding and was admitted to Kwong Hospital the next day. When he died on March the 4th, Liu had already set in motion a chain of events that would have devastating consequences, not only for Hong Kong, but the rest of the world as well. Hospital staff became infected, as did several other guests at the Metropole Hotel, who unknowingly spread it to other parts of the world. Health Secretary Yeo Kyung didn't think there was any reason to worry.
We are not talking about any outbreaks in the community.
But the warning signs were all there. More than 100 medical workers at the Prince of Wales Hospital fell ill with the same symptoms. Refusing to take any chances, the World Health Organization put Hong Kong on its list of SARS-affected areas. It also issued an advisory warning travelers not to come here. But it wasn't until a month after SARS first appeared that authorities started getting their act together by making the disease their top priority.
And the fact that today I'm able to stand here and talk to you like this is because of all these progress we have made.
By this time, it was obvious that the killer disease had spread beyond hospitals into the community. Amoy Gardens saw the worst of it. That outbreak was started by a 33-year-old kidney patient who went to the estate to visit his brother, unaware that he had caught SARS while receiving treatment at the Prince of Wales Hospital. He started a full-blown epidemic in Block E of Amoy Gardens. The government tried to contain the outbreak by sealing off the block and putting all residents under quarantine. One day later, it took an even more drastic step, packing them all into buses and sending them off to isolation camps outside the city.
At this stage, we need to do a much more detailed, in-depth investigation of the facilities in Block E.
Environmental factors indeed were to blame. The transmission of the virus was blamed on a faulty sewage system. With dozens of people falling ill every day, the government launched a massive cleanup campaign in a desperate attempt to restore the city's image. Authorities also screened travellers to make sure no one would carry the virus into or out of Hong Kong. Officials from the WHO came here for a first-hand look and eventually declared Hong Kong SARS-free 4 months after the outbreak began. Premier Wen Jiabao stopped over in Hong Kong at the end of June to celebrate this achievement and won many hearts and minds when he made a personal visit to the now infamous Amoy Gardens. But criticism over the government's handling of the outbreak didn't die down, so an expert committee was set up to look into this. But the findings disappointed many who felt that heads should roll.
But justice isn't served by blame.
After that announcement, Health Secretary Yeo Kyung publicly accepted responsibility for the SARS outbreak. He said he had contemplated resigning, but decided against it to carry on facing the challenges ahead for Hong Kong's health sector. The hospital authority also conducted its own review on the outbreak, and that also refused to play the blame game. SARS victims demanding accountability are now pinning their hopes on the Legislative Council, which is conducting its own probe. SARS has taken a terrible toll in Hong Kong. 299 people dead, 1,755 infected, and untold damage to society, people's livelihoods, and the economy on the whole. The government says it has learnt its lesson. Contingency plans have been put in place, and public hospitals are now equipped with enhanced infection control and isolation facilities. Hong Kong's own Centre for Health Protection to deal with infectious diseases should be up and running next year.
Tung may have thought he had rounded the corner after the SARS crisis, but he was wrong. His plans for national security legislation created such a public uproar that it shook the very foundations of his government and sent alarm bells ringing all the way to Beijing. In the end, Tung was forced into a humiliating retreat that left his reputation in tatters.
These are the images that caused Tung Chee-hwa sleepless nights. Public discontent about his policies spilling out into the streets in a massive display of resentment and frustration that had the country's leaders sitting up in alarm in Beijing. By his own admission, the July 1st rally was a wake-up call for Tung, a hard lesson that forced him to change his style of running Hong Kong. It all started here, with Article 23 of our mini-constitution, the Basic Law. Under Article 23, Hong Kong is obliged to pass laws banning treason, sedition, subversion and theft of state secrets. To fulfill this requirement, the Tung administration put forward legislation proposals that alarmed critics, who said the government was seeking new powers that threatened civil rights. Which is why they demanded the government introduce the proposed law in a detailed document known as a White Bill for public consultation. The tough-talking Regina Ip, Security Secretary at the time, was put in charge of selling the legislation to the public. But her abrasive style earned her many enemies and alienated the public. This is what she had to say about issuing a White Bill. Taxi drivers, restaurant waiters and McDonald's staff will not study the provisions of a White Bill in detail, and only legislators and academics would do so. Ip also criticised religious and political leaders for creating a herd mentality, which prompted comments from people who didn't understand the proposals. In February, a group of activists were so incensed with the proposed laws, they stormed a security panel meeting at the Legislative Council. Public anger over the government's handling of the national security laws culminated in this: a massive show of people power, never before seen in Hong Kong. 500,000 people took to the streets to oppose the law on July 1st. And spurred on by that first taste of people power, protesters held another massive gathering outside the Legislative Council building 8 days later. This time, 50,000 people turned up. The rallies plunged the Tung administration into a crisis, and it was Regina Ip who became the first casualty. She stepped down a week after the protests, although the government insists she had offered to resign for personal reasons on June 25th, well before the mass rallies took place. The chief executive's determination to push ahead with the law led to another resignation 5 days after the July 1st protest. Liberal Party leader James Tien quit Tung's cabinet because his call to delay the passage of the law was ignored. Tung was regretful but still determined to push ahead with the legislation, saying it was his duty to have them in place. Just over a week after the mass rallies, Tung promised never again to push ahead with policies which are unpopular with the public, and said he would change his style of leadership to restore confidence in his administration. But first, he had to find someone to fill Regina Ip's shoes. He chose former ICAC chief Ambrose Lee for the job in August. Lee promised that the final version of the national security legislation would be one that had the public's blessing. After almost a year of dithering over the Article 23 legislation, Tung pushed the project to its final stage, withdrawal in a humiliating about-face.
I have seen that there's still some concern expressed in the community about Article 23. And for that reason, I think that we need to re-examine the whole issue.
With the district council elections approaching, Tung's about-face was widely seen as a move to help his main political allies, the DAB party, which was fast losing popularity because of its unquestioning support for the national security legislation. But the damage was already done. DAB candidates were trounced by the Democrats in the district council elections in November, and party chairman Jung Yuk-sing had to make good on a promise to resign if his colleagues did badly. Tung and his allies have an even bigger headache on their hands now. The prospect of pro-democracy lawmakers making huge gains in the Legislative Council elections next year.
Regina Ip wasn't the only member of Tung's cabinet who was forced to step down by public pressure. Anthony Leung, who Tung appointed as financial secretary, quit in disgrace after just 2 years in the job, when it was revealed he had bought a luxury car just before he raised vehicle taxes. Leung escaped prosecution, but his case cast a damaging shadow on Tung's accountability system.
What could have been a high-flying career with a prominent place in the halls of power came to an embarrassing end. Anthony Leung was handpicked by Tung Chee-hwa to take up the post of financial secretary and lead Hong Kong out of its economic problems. But just 2 years into the job, Leung was exposed for buying a new Lexus saloon 2 months before he raised vehicle taxes in his budget in March. He tried damage control by donating $380,000 to charity, double the amount he saved on the taxes he was accused of dodging. But the show of good faith wasn't enough to convince an outraged public. It got worse for Leung after he admitted that he had failed on more than one occasion to declare the car purchase, including an executive council meeting when some of his fellow cabinet members declared their interests in buying new cars.
My behavior is highly inappropriate as a principal official. I would like to make my most sincere apology to the public.
Despite the obvious damage to Tung's new accountability system, under which top officials were to be held directly responsible for their mistakes, the chief executive refused to accept Leung's resignation. Tung tried to soothe public outrage by scolding Leung in public, but he was in turn accused of favoritism and insincerity. Hounded by angry lawmakers, Leung tried to justify the scandal. He said he needed the car for his wife and their new baby, and the timing of its purchase was not intentional. A Porsche and a Jeep he already owned were apparently not suitable for carrying his new family around. No one bought the excuses. Complaints about abuse of power prompted an ICAC investigation into the scandal, which was dubbed Cargate by the local media. At the height of his unpopularity, Leung made a surprise announcement on July 16th that he was stepping down, and this time Tung accepted his resignation. But the timing of his departure was met with suspicion. It came just a day after the ICAC presented the Justice Department with its investigation report on the scandal. The controversy wasn't over yet. The Justice Department created another storm this month when it announced that it had decided not to prosecute Leung because there wasn't enough evidence to take him to court. Director of Public Prosecutions Grenville Cross said there was no proof that Leung had deliberately tried to evade his own taxes.
If the evidence was there, I would have prosecuted him.
Justice Secretary Elsie Leung also denied media reports that she had been advised by legal experts that there were sufficient grounds to prosecute Leung.
After the break, we'll have more on Tung Chee-hwa's troubles and Hong Kong getting up close and personal with rock legends the Rolling Stones and soccer superstars Real Madrid. Stay with us.
Of man and apes. Was there a point in evolution where humans stepped away from the apes and took a new path? An animated insight into the beasts within on Science of Walking with Beasts. Tonight at 9.
10秒噃。
點解啊？
徹底清潔先可以減少疾病傳播㗎。
記得要抹乾淨對手啊！
係啊，養成個人衛生習慣，洗乾淨對手，都盡量唔好摸眼、口同鼻啊。
Be vigilant and prepared for SARS.
In college, take note of love and life with Korea's pop idols. Samsung Anycall Special Korean Hour every Saturday evening at 6. Death, life's greatest enemy. Can we ever hope to defeat, vanquish, crush and kill death? An inspirational message that'll shape and stir life. Thursday afternoon at 12:25.
Welcome back. We continue with our look back at the year 2003 with a focus on Tung Chee-hwa's troubles. Tung earned a short reprieve when China's first man in space accepted his invitation to visit Hong Kong. It was a clear sign that Beijing wanted to help Tung repair the damage to his image.
When Tung Chee-hwa asked Beijing to send Yang Li-wei across to Hong Kong for a victory celebration, the central government was quick to respond. It was a clear show of support from Beijing for Tung, who was desperate to do something to boost his sagging popularity. Yang's visit in November unleashed a storm of patriotic fervor. Yang didn't disappoint. He brought along a gift, a world premiere of a short video he filmed himself while in space. The Hong Kong audience got to see it even before it was broadcast on mainland television. The next day, Yang was greeted by a sea of guests when he attended the opening of an exhibition showcasing his space mission at the Science Museum. Thousands of people had spent hours lining up to get free tickets to the show. Space fever reached a climax with an earthbound show at the Hong Kong Stadium. The Sea of Red Flags was the biggest show of patriotism since the handover in 1997. And in one of his most difficult missions, singing a duet with action star Jackie Chan, Yang passed with flying colors. Yang also had a chance to do some sightseeing, but the view from space turned out to be much better than the view he got here. Visibility was down to minimum because of heavy air pollution. And the man who didn't seem to say much opened up to students on the third day of his visit. He described how he had trained 5 years for the historic mission and how he was handpicked from 1,500 people to be stuffed inside a tin can and shot around the world 21 times. Showcasing a more human side, Yang described how he felt about failing to spend enough time with his family, missing his son's birth and being away when his wife is ill.
而感到很内疚。有人对航天人比作超人，可航天员也并非是铁板一块的，他也要食人间烟火。我们一样爱家庭。
After spending 6 days in Hong Kong, when it was time to go, Yang left behind his spacesuit along with a promise that he'll be back. In the end, the flying visit cost Hong Kong $13 million, but no one was complaining. And what would a hero be without a gentleman's manners? 2 weeks after he left, Yang sent the people of Hong Kong a thank you letter. You wouldn't expect less from a national hero.
But Yang Li-wei's visit to Hong Kong was only a temporary reprieve. The Tung administration found itself bogged down in yet another controversy that affected Hong Kong's international reputation. The chaos at the much-publicized musical extravaganza known as the Harbour Fest. And then there was the public outcry over the government's plans for harbour reclamation.
The sound of satisfaction. This concert by the Rolling Stones was the grand climax of the Harbour Fest, but it almost didn't happen. It was an off-again, on-again affair that reflected the chaos plaguing the $100 million festival. The musical extravaganza funded by taxpayers' money was meant to tell the world that Hong Kong was back with a bang after SARS, but it ended up doing more damage than good to the city's international image. Everything seemed to go wrong from the beginning. Escalating costs, poor ticket sales, and performers pulling out at the last minute. At one stage, the organizers decided to give out free tickets to pacify the crowds after British girl band Atomic Kitten cancelled an appearance. But there was chaos as 9,000 free tickets were snapped up and hundreds had to be turned away empty-handed. At the center of the storm were 2 men who organized the show. Mike Rouse, the head of the government department in charge of promoting Hong Kong overseas, and James Thompson, chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce. Both were accused of bungling the preparations and wasting taxpayers' money. The final bill turned out to be exactly $100 million, the entire amount the government had promised to cover the festival's losses. Thompson tried to show his good faith by dipping into his own pocket to cover the extra costs. But he found himself in even hotter water when it was revealed that he and his wife were the sole owners of the company set up to manage the Harbourfest finances. Rouse himself, under pressure to resign over the fiasco, found the media spotlight unbearable at times.
Forget about 1 billion, forget about 1 trillion, 100 million. Full stop.
Why did it increase?
It has not increased.
Rouse was Show Secretary Henry Tang took ultimate responsibility for the staging of the event, admitting it could have been handled better.
We overestimated that they are able to pull off such a complex event in such a short period of time.
The show is over, but an independent investigation into the fiasco is underway. Victoria Harbour, soon to become Victoria River. That's what environmental activists were claiming when they began stalling the government's controversial reclamation work by taking their concerns to the courts and the streets. They were led by this man, Winston Chu, a retired lawyer who had been fighting to save the harbour for 8 years. A landmark court ruling on the Wan Chai project in July set the stage for the showdown. The court found the government guilty of breaching its own harbour protection laws and ruled in favour of the activists. Work on the Wan Chai project was suspended, but officials appealed against the ruling. A final court decision in February is expected to settle the entire harbour dispute once and for all, including the central project. The government argued that the Wan Chai and central projects were necessary to ease downtown traffic jams, but they were accused of filling in more of the harbour than was needed to make land for other commercial developments. Another court case in September failed to stop the central reclamation work, but the government later agreed to scale back the size of the projects after the extent of public opposition became evident when thousands of people took to the streets in protest. An emotional Chu said he was willing to go all the way to save the harbour.
The government continues to reclaim the harbour without any proposal acceptable to the public. I shall jump into the harbour.
In the end, Chu jumped into a plane and fled Hong Kong to escape threats made against his life and his elderly mother's.
The year wasn't all doom and gloom for Tung, though. The mainland and Hong Kong signed a far-reaching free trade agreement known as the Closer Economic Partnership Arrangement, or CEPA. The economy is growing at a faster rate than expected. The property market is recovering. Consumer confidence has returned, and the unemployment situation is improving. The government's problems were briefly forgotten towards the end of the year when an elusive crocodile which mysteriously appeared in a Yuen Long River captured the public's imagination. The crocodile, a 1.5-meter saltwater reptile with the potential to grow into a dangerous monster, surfaced in November. It spent weeks playing cat and mouse with John Lever, a famous hunter who came all the way from Australia to catch it. Lever left Hong Kong admitting defeat. A group of mainland crocodile hunters did not fare any better either, but they plan to return and resume the hunt. It's time now to look at the local sporting events that captured the headlines this year. The city needed a boost after SARS, and soccer superstars Real Madrid provided just that when they came to town. But things got a little overheated in the rush to get tickets.
Hong Kong geared up for one of its most famous and anticipated sporting events of the year, the Rugby Sevens. It was England versus New Zealand in the final of the Cup competition. England, the defending champions, were in no mood to surrender their crown, and sure enough, they beat the Kiwis. Their victory was a sign that after years of dominance by teams from the Southern Hemisphere, the balance of power was finally shifting north, a trend that would be confirmed in Australia later in the year. But despite the rugby revelry, a shadow hung over the tournament. Its name was SARS. Sport came to a standstill in the weeks following the tournament, as the disease spread fear and misery through Hong Kong. The city's morale was at an all-time low by the time Hong Kong was cleared of the disease. So, to revive the flagging spirits of the city, the government announced a wave of initiatives and events. and some of the first items on the agenda were sporting events. Liverpool were invited to the territory in July, and with stars such as Michael Owen and Emil Heskey on offer, the match between the Merseysiders and the Hong Kong League 11 was an instant sellout. But that was just a taste of more to come. Next on the list were Spanish champions and 9-time European winners Real Madrid and their galaxy of stars. The mere notion that players such as Ronaldo, Zinedine Zidane and David Beckham were on the way to Hong Kong drove the city into a frenzy of excitement. And what happened next was extraordinary. Thousands of people came down here to Hong Kong Stadium in the rushed frenzy to get hold of tickets. Eventually, it seemed half of Hong Kong decided to brave the searing summer heat and wait for tickets. The line got steadily longer as the numbers waiting grew and grew. And tempers flared over ticket allocation, and the Hong Kong Football Association was accused of mishandling the situation. Nevertheless, Real's arrival to Hong Kong lifted the city, and the match was a great success. Real may have beaten Hong Kong 4-2, but the local team acquitted themselves well against the Spanish side.
And finally, it's time to pay tribute to those who left us this year. Among them were cantopop star and movie icon Leslie Cheung, who jumped to his death from a hotel balcony, and another cantopop legend, Anita Mui, who died of cancer. And that was our look back at the year 2003. It's been a difficult year for Hong Kong and a nightmare at times for the Tung administration. But looking ahead, it looks like the worst is over and we can hope for a better 2004. I'm Yondan Latu. Thanks for joining us, and from all of us here at ATV, have a very happy New Year.
Crown Prince Hotel Dongguan Special 2003, the year that was at home, was sponsored by Crown Prince Hotel Dongguan. Happy New Year, Mr. Bean, and what's your New Year's resolution? To be Ben-Hur, the chariot rider, the demolisher, and last but not least, a one-of-a-kind party host of the year. Mr. Bean, Wednesday, New Year's Eve at 8:30. Between a little prankster and the restless spirits, there's plenty of unfinished business. Winner of the 2003 Tokyo Anime Award, Hanada Shonen Shi, Japanese time, every Sunday morning at 10.
Good evening. Here's a look at today's top stories. Cantopop diva Anita Mui lost her battle against cervical cancer early this morning. She was 40 years old. Mui's close friend, Lau Pui Kei, announced the sad news during a 4 a.m. briefing at the hospital, attended by her celebrity friends. Mui's glittering career spanned 2 decades and earned her the title Asia's Madonna. The French news agency AFP has quoted a Guangdong official saying that all tests have produced positive results in a suspected SARS case. But it's still not official yet, since the Ministry of Health and the World Health Organization have the final say in the matter. And so far, they're still treating it as a suspected case. Taiwan's first SARS patient in 5 months has recovered and was discharged from hospital today, 2 weeks after testing positive for the virus. The 44-year-old military scientist, accompanied by 3 medical workers, left Hoping Hospital early this morning after medical tests cleared him of the virus. And the winning numbers in tonight's Mark 6 draw are 1, 22, 36, 38, 39 and 47. The extra number is 27. Join us for the next update in 1 hour.
This is ATV World. Up next, did humans really evolve from apes? An animated insight into the beasts within on Science of Walking with Beasts.